welcome. We are honoured that we are sharing this hour slot with you. This discussion today has been brought to you in collaboration with the BPF Futures and YPREF. And today we'll be exploring the impact that the coronavirus has had on the service office sector, how that sector might respond, and what potentially lies beyond that as well. So we'll also be discussing what the definition is of service office sector and how that differs from flexible office space. We'll also be looking at the different operating models that exist. And really we're going to be understanding and trying to tease out the structural differences between what coronavirus has done and perhaps some of the actual underlying issues that were already existing. We'll also be focusing on its contribution to the UK's recovery and how valuation might respond to that as well. So introductions, because we've got quite a lot to cover. My name is Kemi Oguntoye. I am an associate at Say Property Consulting, and we offer advisory services to developers and landlords in their mixed-use schemes and residential-led schemes. And yeah, I will now pass over to Christy.
Hi everyone, I'm Christy Bowen and I run the Central London valuation business at JLL, and I've been focusing quite a lot over recent years on the flex workspace as well.
Hi everyone, Justin Harley from Yardi Systems. We focus on providing technology for flexible workspaces all around the world.
Hi, James Lowery. I head up Story, which is British Land's flexible workspace offer. Just a little bit of background on Story. We launched it about 3 years ago. We focus on the larger side of the flex market. So a typical company is about 50 people, 2-year lease, and it's often their kind of European or UK headquarters. We operate exclusively within British Land buildings. So, you know, we own the building, we typically own the buildings around them because we have them in kind of campuses. We have about 340,000 square feet currently operating right now. And I am calling in from one of our newest buildings, which is Osman Road, just kind of north of Shoreditch on Regent's Canal, which is a wooden building, kind of beautiful, sustainable and adaptable. So I'll hopefully try and drop in some points around that as we talk.
Hi, John Hope. I work for Barclays and run our Eagle Lab network. So that's a network of 25 business incubators dotted around the UK. We aim to support startups, corporates, investors and other organisations such as universities and councils connect and innovate, and ultimately, you know, with the intention to support growth for the UK. Across the 25 sites, we've got around 650 startup businesses who are based at our locations. So they're utilising co-working space as well as private offices, as well as getting access to mentoring, growth programmes and just general support connections. Brilliant,
thank you. So right now there should be a poll that's popping up on everyone's screen. There are 3 questions on the poll, and we would really encourage you to just answer these questions, and we will review the answers at the end of our discussion. All your answers remain anonymous, but please do answer the 3 questions. And so I'll give you about 30 seconds just to fill that in, and then that box that has popped up should disappear. Just to add, we're really interested in what you have to say, so please do fill it in. One of the questions that I have for everyone who is on the panel is, as we are now starting to emerge, some of us, from our homes and start to look at what happens next, or what happens in this uncertain period next, one of the key themes that seems to have been coming through is the office sector dead? And by extension, is the service office sector dead? And what exactly have been your experiences on the panel in terms of like the past 4 months? So perhaps, Christy, I could start with you.
Yeah, this is something we've been discussing a lot internally, and I think it's, you know, it's a situation that everyone has been placed in over the last 4 months, and therefore it's really impacted everybody that did previously work in the office. But our feelings is that the longer this goes on working from home, what we've realized is, yes, we can all work from home, and actually the technology has enabled that to happen quite seamlessly in many ways. And also, you know, efficiencies have increased as well in part. But I think the longer it goes on, what we've seen is that it's probably not sustainable on a long-term basis. And I think that's for a number of reasons, but largely to do with the need to interact and collaborate with other people. And it's just those accidental meetings, I think, in part, you know, when you're by the coffee machine or walking by someone's desk, that now have to become much more formal in this current environment. But also, I think just for mental health benefits, it obviously varies significantly everyone's circumstances at home, but particularly so those that live by themselves, more so than those that perhaps live with other people. You know, I think there's loneliness effectively working from home, and really miss that interaction with other people and having that focus to the day. So I think, yes, long term, we do need an office, be it flexible or a sort of more traditional fixed office, but perhaps how we use that office will change, and it'll be much more about collaboration space rather than necessarily just going in to write a report or put your head down and work.
And Justin, perhaps if I could bring you in there, one of the points that Christy made was about the collaboration that might happen in offices going forward. How do you see technology playing its part in terms of that new shake-up that Christy was describing?
Well, I think technology is fundamental, and I think actually what, just echoing what Christy's saying, I think what COVID has done I think the thing I would say is it's accelerated trends that were already happening. So things that were already happening, underlying in commercial real estate, flexible real estate, it's just basically almost hyped over the last 4 months, and technology is a key part of that, because I think we're right. We're going to see more remote working. People are going to want more flexibility, and you know, Yardi, for example, we use flexible workspace. We have 7,000 employees worldwide. We will only use more flexible workspace now. You know, we mobilized overnight to put 7,000 people at home. The people are screaming to go back to the office. People want to go back for all the reasons: collaboration, sharing, creativity. But being a big corporate, we're risk averse. We're not going to let people commute. We're still going to hold it back for a while, I think. So I think so I think we're going to see a bit of, you know, the trends are going to be there. We just see them accelerate. And I think that, I don't think it's dead, by the way. Bad offices are dead. The office market is not dead. And I think we just say people like James at British Land, I think they're right in the sweet spot now. That's my personal belief.
Okay, so before we come to you, James, I just want to bring Jonathon in. Jonathon, what's your experience been with your tenants with the impact of the coronavirus?
Look, I think it's been super interesting. It's been a very tough time for, I think, everybody really, you know, whether the organisations that run the spaces as well as the businesses and individuals who use them. You know, what we do know is that we had a full switch from obviously providing all of the support that we provide to businesses, so not just the co-working and private office space, but also the growth programs and the mentoring and experts into a virtual environment, and that's worked pretty well for the first couple of months. For the last month or two, you know, our members have been telling us that they really want to get back into the office. So we are, you know, for clarity, we're still closed at this moment in time, but working super hard to reopen. So we know 66% of our members are telling us they'll want to come back either immediately or within a month, and they're also telling us they want their membership to look a little bit different to how it has done previously. So they're wanting a little bit more flexibility in their membership, the ability to dip in and dip out more. So some are actually have embraced the working from home, but actually want to retain a space within within co-working spaces, so they can have that formal place to meet up with their colleagues and also to remain part of a community.
And just so
also,
our audience, just so our audience are aware, could you describe the type of tenants that you have in your spaces as well?
Yeah, of course. So Eagle Labs are business incubators. So they are physical environments with co-working spaces and private offices, as well as event space to support the startup ecosystem. So anybody who's effectively got a tech business, it might be somebody with an initial idea who's looking to develop that idea and get some to raise funds, all the way up to people with 10, 15, 20 people within their business and might have raised, 5 to 10 million pounds. Our sort of mission really is to support those businesses learn how to develop their idea and to create a sort of an interconnected ecosystem across the UK. And so the tech businesses like to work in co-working and collaboration spaces because they recognise the ability, aside from the benefits of social and collaboration and not wanting to be disturbed by your children, who are about to pull out my internet cable, by the way, is the ability to learn from others. And the fact that building a tech business is something that that you can tech entrepreneurs are collaborative by nature and are willing to support one another, and therefore being in a space allows some of that serendipitous sort of activity to happen that Christy mentioned earlier on. So one of the things that we're really, really mindful of at the moment is that whilst when we return to work and let's say 66% of our members come back immediately or within a month, how do we create that connectivity through new technologies that Justin will no doubt be thinking about to those people who actually would prefer to remain at home? So how do you create a virtual community that instills all of the sort of the benefits of that collaborative kind of attitude, environment and philosophy, but giving people a choice how they dip in and dip out?
No, absolutely. And James, perhaps you can talk about your experience and the type of tenants that you have as well, and how you've been impacted. That story.
Yeah. Well, actually, just picking up on the kind of the points made at the moment on the office space is dead, and that. I think I kind of have a nice analogy. I think, or at least a personal one, I thought, around the kind of you can work from home relatively effectively in the same way that kind of beginning of lockdown I could sit in my back garden and try and do some sit-ups on kind of an app, right? I've always liked to kind of a bit of keep fit and used to do competitive sport, and actually I've kind of got to this point where I'm sitting at home trying to do some kind of fitness-based sort of thing, and I'm starting to struggle, right? Really starting to struggle. And then, what I'm kind of hoping for is I can go back and, get into the gym and actually sit in the gym, and you're in an environment which really, is set up to do that kind of keep, the kind of exercise in the right way. Take that one step further. And, I used to do a lot of running, and actually if you're running and you're running on your own, you get so far. If you're running with another group of people and you're all pushing each other, you do a lot better. You are kind of a lot more kind of, competitive. You push yourself harder. You kind of thrive off other people. And I think there's something to take from that with the office environment. There's been many benefits of working from home and, kind of seeing family and all sorts of things like that. But actually, it's really nice now to be kind of out and about, and then to kind of get this, different locations. Actually, we've talked about collaboration. There's a cultural point with the companies. There's something about drawing boundaries as well. I think as we see more and more the kind of the lockdown continue, I think the sort of the burnout and the kind of the ability just to sort of stop working at some stages, and kind of that kind of blurring of life and of home life and work life has been again, it's, as Justin mentioned, it's a trend that's been going for some time. And it's probably kind of, there's probably times right now where it's crossing over a bit too much. So to kind of go to a place where you can just actually get out and do something and finish a task, come back, I think there's something in that. And doing it to the kind of gym point in a space that really, really performs, where, your children aren't about to call your internet connection out, or, the doorbell doesn't ring or the dog doesn't bark, all these things, I think are kind of, are really important. And look, to talk about the kind of, from a story point of view through the kind of the recent kind of lockdown, as I kind of mentioned in my introduction, we focus on the slightly larger part of the flex market. So they're quite big companies, and actually when we're looking through, where are we, how our company's doing, and speaking to them a lot, and we know our customers pretty well, and we started to kind of realize that our people are going to be okay through this period. And actually, we looked at some of the companies in our space, and and it's their UK headquarters, and they are as a business bigger than British Land. So I sort of had this. Hang on, you're not a tiny company, right? And there's a bit of a perception. There's a bit of a perception of that in the flex market, and there's definitely there's parts of that which are of the market which do say that, which is really, really important. But there's a lot of different products supporting different areas, and I think from a story point of view, that's the slightly larger companies on a 2-year lease, they've all been relatively resilient through it. But that said, we have I think one of the most kind of important things that we have focused on through this period is just communicating. And we can do lots of great things in the background and make sure spaces are safe and everything that we can do to help a safe return to work. But actually, if you're not telling people that, I think right now you're sitting at home kind of worrying about things and feeling a bit isolated perhaps, communication has been really important.
Brilliant, thank you. So would you say that during this last 4 months, you haven't taken as big a hit as perhaps the perception is out there? Financially, I mean.
Financially, so I would, yes, I would say from a story point of view, we haven't, because I think there's the perception point we've seen in the press a lot. Everyone likes to talk about the offices are dead, right? It kind of hits headline news, and I think in the flex service market has over the kind of past few years got lots of attention for kind of good reasons and kind of bad reasons. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of reasons why it gets attention. However, I can see if there's a company of kind of 4 people on a monthly membership, and at a kind of such an early stage in their kind of journey as a company, kind of cash flow resilience is probably is probably more sensitive. Then I could see that it's easier just to sit and work from home and kind of cope with it and be able to collaborate and just deal with it that way. And I think and that's that when we have businesses are they're really big, so they just need some space. A 100-person company, they need to go back to their office at some stage, and they can have the sort of the resilience to get through it. That said, we made sure we helped out where we could, right? We do see this as a genuine kind of partnership. So we very quickly looked to, as soon as we're into lockdown, to put our buildings into kind of a mode which they are safe, they are still kind of operational, but they're kind of they're almost in caretaker mode.
Okay.
So we are saving costs, and any cost that we save, and kind of jumped on this very quickly, any cost that we could save operationally, we passed straight on to everybody, all of our customers. And that was a British Land initiative at the kind of service level side of things. But obviously we kind of look after more of that operational experience for of our customers. So we passed that on, which again was it took a lot of work, and there's a bit of risk associated with it, but it was appreciated.
That's great. And
just on that, Kemi, on that question, Kemi. So it's interesting, kind of speaking to a multitude of different operators from different segments. The couple of things in terms of your question is service income, i.e. meeting rooms, co-working memberships, that has been hit very badly right across the board. That has been hit. In terms of the rental income for offices, there has been downward pressure everywhere. And depending on markets, I think people that have had a customer profile that well-funded customers that are slightly larger customers, then less of a hit. I think where there's been a lot of new startup type business, more of a hit.
Okay. And Christy, maybe I could bring you in to just help illustrate the difference between the service office sector. How would you define it, and how does it differ from the flexible office space?
Well, from our perspective, we now define it all as flexible space.
Okay.
But there's different models within that. So at one extreme, you have the co-working, which is almost like turn up and sit at a desk next to someone else, which is a bit more on a membership basis. At the other end of the scale, you've got the fixed fixed desks in a private office. And that's probably the old, more traditional model that we've seen, that's been around for many years. But more recently, what we've seen is a combination of the two, where perhaps you might have about, say, 80% of fixed desks and 20% of co-working. What, as everyone's just adhered to, it's that sort of pure co-working space which has been most impacted over the last 4 months, partly because of actual social distancing, but also due to the fact that it tends to be the smaller startup companies and tends to be on the most flexible basis of operating, whereas the bigger corporates tend to have maybe license agreements of 1 or 2 years. So what we've actually seen is a number of those operators that have that co-working segment, such as WeWork, for example, actually converting co-working space into fixed desks at the moment.
Okay. And regionally, how has the sector fared as well? We've looked a lot at London, but what about outside in the regions?
So I focus on London myself, but from what I understand is that the physical occupation has been greater in the regions. Okay. So everyone's biggest concern at the moment, particularly in London, is transport, how you physically get to the office. And most flex space in London has, as James was saying, effectively been open, but on a caretaker basis. So you can go in, but it's like skeleton staff, etc. Yeah. And that physical occupation in London has been sort of about 5% maybe. Whereas in the regions, because you've got that opportunity to drive generally and not rely on such dense public transport, we've actually seen it closer to 30% in the regions. Oh. How long term that will play out, because I think, I'm not sure about the rest of the panel, but I work in London, and I can't see that long term London's going to lose its presence as such a dominant city for a variety of reasons. But it's definitely been impacted by transport over the short term. And we're seeing that in our own JLL offices. We've got more people attending the office in Manchester. I think Norwich has got the highest number of actual physical occupation. London is the lowest. And for example, Canary Wharf, I don't think we've even opened our office there because we're worried about transport and how you get to. Yeah, when there's only one access point. So I think that's the same across the board.
That's great, thank you. And we are starting to get audience questions as well, which is great. I'd encourage you to write your names so that when we answer them at the end, we know who we're addressing. Turning to the recovery of the sector, local advocacy and supporting the community have become, really big buzzwords of the pandemic. And thinking about like the Chancellor's announcement in terms of like the green agenda and sustainability, what are some of the things that the service of the sector needs to do in order to encourage people to get back, but also play its part in that, green recovery?
Well, shall I, if I pick up, I think that the emphasis of all office occupiers, sustainability on that point has moved really high up the agenda. And I think probably in this pandemic, that goes to sustainability and well-being, so it's, about the quality of air, about the surfaces, about having the right space within those buildings. So that is definitely moving up the agenda for all occupiers. And then I would say along those lines, I would say that the flex office operators will also need to move into that space. I think we're going to see a massive divergence between, the best office buildings, and that's going to be in terms of, location specification, but particularly things like sustainability, and those that are just average. And I think we're going to see a massive divergence over the next couple of years where demand for, however you want to define it, the best prime stays strong, and rental values and etc. for that space is retained, but everything else actually it falls away. And I think, as I said, flex operators will need to be able to compete, on that basis. I think as part of what we'll see with this pandemic is much more about traditional landlords competing with the flex operators. I think that's a trend we were seeing before, and it will be accelerated now for a variety of reasons. One, they might have to actually take over the space, which operators have failed on. But also the model that traditional landlords were moving into was probably much more about having your own fixed space, but with those additional services and flexibility provided. And it's going to be high on the agenda of those traditional landlords. And therefore, I think there's going to be much more competition in that respect.
And you think the traditional landlords will be in a better position to weather that as well than an operator-led?
Yeah, I mean, I think as with all businesses at the moment, it's all about cash flow. And for those operators that have leased assets at high market rents, there's just not that room to absorb, drops in occupancy or desk rates, etc., over this short period. And they will struggle unless their landlords give them the flexibility in terms of rent-free periods or reduced rents, etc. I think most operators have moved to monthly payments, and actually I think the payments as at June were higher than we expected. But I've lost my train of thought now. But I'm lost. Sorry, again, or someone.
I pick up is it okay to just pick up on the kind of the landlord point, just to kind of build on that, and actually I'll pick up on the sustainability point as well.
Okay, great. Okay.
But just on the kind of the more landlords, I think approaching the kind of the serviced office industry, and is that better than the kind of the operator bit? And there's kind of pros and cons with each, actually. I would say, but I think to Christy's point, I think there is there is an advantage of, particularly in the kind of recent months, of owning the kind of the building, and I think that not having the lease liability gives you as a kind of I think the sort of story we see as kind of an operator, but we're sitting within British land. We have a bit more flexibility, a bit more agility as a business, and the kind of cash flow point of is definitely helpful. At the same time, we don't get a free ride, right? You're not getting paid rent. You're not getting paid rent. It doesn't matter, but so you can manage it both ways. And I can see more and more landlords moving into the sector, and look, they might move into through partnerships as well. It's not kind of always do it yourself, but to me, there's this kind of fundamental point that you're kind of understanding the customer, right? That's really getting under the customer's skin and delivering something which they need. And I, in any business, right, kind of forgetting whether it's kind of property or not, that's a good thing to do. Understanding your kind of the person who's using it and designing something around it, I think that's going to be increasingly important. And actually, I think, to Justin's point about accelerating trends, we've just gone through we're going through a very complicated time for offices, and this kind of rather than the sort of this mindset of kind of service, it's essentially kind of outsourcing your real estate, right? So and you're doing it with a trusted partner, and if you're going through these kind of tricky times and everything is just sort of you're trying to work out how your own business is operating, never mind kind of all the sort of complexity that comes with kind of the office space, then just having somebody who you trust and can take care of all of that stuff just kind of makes sense, and you can kind of draw parallels to many other kind of industries that this kind of overall drive to outsourcing, and it's often the case through kind of economic kind of downturns that there's a greater shift to outsourcing as well. So I can I wholly kind of agree with it, but I think I think it's the point around do landlords exclusively have the right to win? No, they don't. It's just they have some advantages. But just do you want to just Jonathan?
I just wanted to ask. Yeah, go for it, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was going to say. So I agree with this sort of listening to clients and the customers and letting them sort of drive things. I guess just going back to your original question, which was about how can spaces sort of support the recovery.
Yeah.
And I think for the UK to recover and globally for us to recover, we need our businesses, corporates to be firing on all cylinders. And I think this is going to be a step change that forces a lot of organisations to have to transform themselves. And so I think one of the opportunities for the real estate sector, the serviced office space, whatever it may be, is to think about what role they actively play within that. So not just a simple outsourcing of the real estate, but actually a role facilitating transformation. Now, one opportunity, could be in and around a flexible workspace, and whereby larger organisations are more cohabit with startups and partner with organisations who run programs that broker sort of understanding of the problems to be solved and potential collaboration between large and small organisations. And so I do think there's obviously, you can look at it in a very simple perspective, which is how can I de-risk somebody's cost base, or you can look at it from a how am I going to help that organisation achieve its overall ambition, which is either to survive, to transform itself, or to significantly grow its revenues.
Justin, did you want to come in? Did you have a point?
I think one of the interesting things, and I think this is one thing that the sector can do. I'm convinced we're going to get remote working is just going to be part of what we do. I'm totally convinced of that. Whatever that looks like, it will be different for different types of employee. At the moment, the offering for flexible space is very limited. We talk about the regions, but really, when we talk about regions, we're talking about Manchester, Leeds, they're big urban conurbations. If you go out to tertiary locations, there's very little for people. There is really very little flexible offering. And personally, one of the things that I would like to see is I'd like to see some of these established operators, maybe James can have a go at doing this and changing British Land's policies, but looking to provide some sort of a solution for remote working, so that actually the real thing is that you can go to a corporate and as Christy said very early on, is provide a much flexible real estate solution that includes collaboration space, head office space, remote working space for people. Because again, to James's comment, is we need the facilities to be able to work properly without dogs barking and the printer not working and all of those things. So I think that's one thing they can. I don't know.
So on that point, one of the trends that I've seen in the resi sector and the mixed use sector is residential landlords building co-working spaces for their residents. Do you think there's an opportunity for that space to be designed in collaboration with service office providers like Jonathon and James, where they partner with the residential landlords or the mixed use landlords to I don't know, strengthen that offering that they have got inside their buildings, potentially?
I can just give my view on that. I actually think that's a really, really interesting opportunity, because the bit which the kind of the non, if you think about this, take it kind of back, it's the kind of distributed model of kind of running a distributed workforce within a kind of various company, and then you can, if you simplify it into sort of more of a hub and spoke kind of real estate solution. So there's kind of there is a central place where people do come together, and we talked about collaboration and everything else, and that I think that sort of makes sense. And then you get into the kind of the spoke, the other locations outside of the kind of the major hubs, and it's the one thing that probably makes me nervous, and I think probably Story, British Land are not kind of best placed to sort of tackle this kind of in its kind of current form. Not to say it's impossible, but it's you're sort of competing a little bit with working from home, right? And actually, but if you kind of break the working from home point down, there's such a different experience, and there are some people who can work from home really effectively, and there are people who can't work from home very effectively. And the bit which I sort of, that you kind of, to sort of generalize, is younger people, kind of living alone. Actually, there's, we picked up on points only. There's either don't have the space, can't do it effectively, sort of loneliness. That solution that you just mentioned, Kenny, is a really interesting one, because it's kind of all of a sudden you're kind of building, you're building this kind of community. You're building the demand for the space. And that's the bit which probably would make me nervous about saying, okay, I'm going to put something in, whichever location, and then I kind of hope that people will come and do my kind of. Yeah. It becomes very risky, but I think all of a sudden you kind of created demand, and it's you're sort of it's quite synergistic as well, because you're kind of getting people, you're helping to kind of let the space, because it's in terms of a residential point of view, because you have this facility, and then you are potentially monetizing it in different ways, as opposed to having a slightly kind of, sad looking kind of few desks, which are kind of, in a corner of a basement or something like that, which I've sort of seen kind of, but you kind of do it probably to execute on it really, really well. It is partnering. It's kind of finding somebody who cares about it a lot, not a kind of somebody who builds apartments who thinks I will, I'm going to do this, I'm going to put a few desks in and it will work, because it's trickier than the partnership thing could work really well.
And are there any lessons, perhaps, Justin, from the residential space that you think are lessons learned that could be applied in the service sector space in terms of how they're doing?
Yeah, I do actually. I think a couple of lessons. One is on the residential side, it's interesting to see how institutional capital is really supporting that sector. I think that helps create better quality, better standards, more flexibility for residents, but also the adoption of technology has been much more consumer-led. So, for example, the use of Alexa in flats, the use of applications for checking in. I think what we're going to see is more contactless, contactless, access, and we see that in Resi now. I think something we'll now see more in Flex, that we're still very much welcome at reception and come and book a meeting room. It's still, there are some apps and some things like that, but for example, it's not as widespread as perhaps it should be. I think that will move very quickly though.
Brilliant, thank you. Jonathon, just in terms of like the startup community and the role that they play in the wider economy, how important is it that we get service offices back on track in terms of, stimulating the UK's recovery?
It's absolutely vital. I mean, if you look at just the Eagle Labs community alone, I think we've collectively, the businesses that we have, our members of Eagle Labs have collectively raised over £900 million over their lifetime, and that's obviously just growing. And so if you think about that flowing through into the UK economy and supply chain, that's vitally important, and that's just our small part of that. And so flexibility is going to be key. That flex is that word cropping up again. Whether that's to help businesses that are scaling, start as a 2-person organization and evolve onto that 4-person office and then get the one next door, and to be able to do that very, very flexibly and within the same space is really, really important. At the other end of the spectrum, just giving people where cash flow is very, very tight, the opportunity to not overcommit to something, because if you force them to overcommit, they're likely to back off, is equally important. So it's a fragile sort of ecosystem, and therefore we have to be as flexible as possible to be able to support it. And I think, as I mentioned before, the co-working and collaboration that you can get within these environments are absolutely critical to their success, just to ensure that the founders of these businesses are able to learn from their peers and people who have gone before them, really. And that in turn is important for the UK and its position within the tech ecosystem.
Great, thank you. And Christy, when we were discussing this previously, valuation came up and some of the challenges that you're having in terms of value in this sector. Could you just talk the audience through some of those issues that exist and what it is you need to be able to offer more enhanced valuations?
Yeah, I guess at the moment the market, at least by square footage, by volume, is dominated by leased assets to SPVs fundamentally. So if you look at WeWork or IWGs, or in the main, they all have an SPV company set up to lease that asset. And that dominates the market at the moment. I think it will change for the reasons we've just discussed. But what that means is that transparency of data is not really there at the moment. So we can sort of anecdotally understand the occupation of a WeWork and what their average desk rates are, etc. From talking to our brokers, we can estimate what we think the costs are based on, you know, we're a business that effectively runs real estate as well. But you don't really get that transparency of the P&Ls. So in terms of either valuing an owner operated asset, there's more limited benchmarks to compare to. And I guess from a red book perspective, it's meant to be about a reasonably efficient operator, which means without benchmarks, you can't see, for example, if I had Stories P&Ls, without the other benchmarks, I don't know if they're outperforming the market or underperforming the market to understand what a reasonably efficient operator would do. So I think that will change for the reasons like we've discussed. I think you're going to have much more owner-operated models where we'll get more transparency of data, and we're seeing a lot of the leased assets now, or operators who would be on the leased asset looking to move to management agreements, where again we'll be able to understand the P&Ls and the data points behind that. As a company, we're trying to collect that data globally into effectively a database like the hotel sector has at the moment. So, you know, we can work out these occupancy levels, etc. I think the other side with an office is just, or flex space, is just the barriers to entry. So other operational businesses tend to be more restricted from a planning perspective. So if you've got a hotel or a student accommodation, etc., you can't just buy the next building and convert it into a hotel. Right. Whereas what you've got from an office is effectively you can buy the next door vacant building, and then through the operation of the business maybe add 30-50% to that value. And I think that just makes, well, particularly banks and some valuers nervous. So again, with time, I think we'll understand that it's more about just owning the building, and it's about that customer relationship, etc., which creates the value, which does get tricky from a red book perspective, because, you know, you have to ignore goodwill and various other things. But yeah, I think the key point is transparency, which hopefully will improve over the next couple of years
as it matures.
Yeah,
no, that's great, thank you. So I've got one final question for everyone, and while I ask it, I'm hoping that the poll will come up as well, the results from the poll. So given the audience that we have, most of the people in the audience are younger professionals, so they've got 10 years or less experience in the sector. And one of the questions that we wanted to check with you panelists was, if you had graduated this year, what area of the real estate industry would you choose to work in, and why? And linked to that, what advice would you be giving to some of the younger professionals who are listening to us today? And while you're thinking about that, I have got the results of the poll. So the first question was, to what extent do you miss working from the office? 30% not really, 60% fairly, and 11% totally. So that's interesting and chimes in with some of the themes that we've been discussing today. The second question, in our new normal, where would you prefer to spend the majority of your time? 2% have said full-time in the office. 39% said mostly in the office, and 59% said mostly at home. No one chose full-time remote. So that is interesting. And the third question, thinking about your answer to the previous question, what needs to change to increase the number of days in the office? So 9% have responded with better technology. 60% have said easier travel. So Christy, what you're seeing at JLL as well definitely chimes here. 16% said healthier buildings. 7% said frequent cleaning. And 9% said greater control over shared spaces. So that is really interesting. Thank you everyone for answering those questions. And I'm going to turn to the audience questions while the panelists answer my advice to the younger generation. So perhaps Jonathon, I could start with you.
I don't work in real estate, so I've worked 16 years in Barclays Bank, doing a variety of different roles, and this is as close as I have come to real estate. So I manage an incubator network, but we proudly say we're not a desk rental business, and I'd encourage anybody who's currently within real estate to think about themselves not in the context of being a desk rental business, but in the business of helping solve businesses. And also meet businesses' ambitions. So think, stretch yourself to think about what role property can play, whether it's through innovation or acting as a platform to help achieve that. So taking a step back is something that I would recommend your audience to do.
Thank you, Justin. Your advice?
I think it's a great question, and I'm biased. So, so I would always work in technology, and the reason is, why I think it's such a brilliant, exciting future, especially in real estate, is real estate's still a bit old-fashioned, and it needs more and more technology to drive it forward. And the investment in prop tech is astronomical. There'll be winners and losers. But for me, you're driving that change, you're part of those fundamentals, and technology is great fun.
And there is a whole other conversation on technology. James?
Actually, I had kind of a thought similar kind of to both Jonathan and Justin's. And I think, and I'm not going to necessarily give a sector, but actually more look at the company, look at the kind of the culture and the mindset of the company, whatever kind of area of property it is. And actually looking, I think it's a bit to Jonathan's point, looking almost through the kind of the asset, the box thing, and just look at the customer and really kind of, a company which actually has this sort of the true kind of understanding of what they're trying to kind of look after, right? Who they're trying to kind of serve, and less about how many pounds per square foot and everything else, and more, what is the kind of the optimum kind of solution for that person, and that kind of requires knowing them and kind of working with them and evolving and being kind of agile overall. I think to Justin's point as well, there's a this kind of, there's a mindset of innovation, right? Because I agree, real estate is a pretty old-fashioned business, and there are kind of some real structural things in there which are tricky to change. But some companies are trying, and I think kind of that keep pushing and pushing, and I think there are companies out there which are trying to do it. There's probably some that are kind of quite happy just to sort of keep at the sort of, the long-term investment vehicle model, and that will still continue, right? That's an important part of the management, but the innovation. And then lastly, kind of with that, this, we picked up on it earlier, this, sustainability and well-being. It's a common theme that's been running for kind of years. It's so obviously the right thing to do, but kind of delivering on it genuinely is sometimes more difficult. So I think if looking through these kind of various businesses, whatever they do, and trying to kind of just get a sense of stuff behind the kind of the day-to-day, the real sort of, and I think that becomes a bit kind of a culture point, and values, which is a bit on the softer side, but they're the companies in my mind that will win.
I agree. Christy, lastly to you.
I've got nothing to add over what everyone else has just said. But I would just say, I think it's actually a really exciting time, for those reasons, a really exciting time to join the industry. Yes, there's issues with recession and the economic pressures, but I actually think for all the reasons that have just been discussed, we're going to see more changes in the industry, over the next 5 years or so than we've perhaps seen over the last 30 years. And that's actually across all sectors, the way we look at retail, offices, and it's actually a really exciting time to come in and understand, like you say, get beyond the pounds per square foot and really understand what drives, well, from my perspective, what drives value and sustains it going forward.
Thank you, guys. That's really helpful. So turning to the audience questions, Harry Philpott from Solo Group, thank you for your question. And he has asked, do the panelists believe that being an owner or operator for your flex space will be a trend moving forward? And do you believe that the franchise profit share arrangements will be more prevalent? Who would like to take that?
I think yes, definitely. I think we've seen it already. If you look at entrance into the market, like Story, but GPE are moving into that space, Derwent are moving into that space, Land Securities. It's definitely the way it's going forward. And I think what amongst everything else, what the flex opera, and probably particularly WeWork, to be honest, has done is disrupt that market. And going back to the point of not viewing it as a landlord and a tenant, but viewing your tenants as customers and much more of a relationship. And that's really disrupted those traditional landlords, and they've had to reassess how they view the tenants of their buildings going forward. And what was the bit on the management or the profit share? Sorry, I missed the last part of the question.
Do you believe that franchise and profit share arrangements will become more prevalent?
Yeah, I think so. I think for both parties, they share in the reward and the risk, whereas at the moment it's a bit one-sided. Right. So if you've got a leased asset and it trades extremely well, the landlord doesn't benefit from that arrangement. But if that tenant goes bust or hands back the keys, it's all downside for the landlord. So I think, and having gone through this period, I think the tenants on leased assets, the operators on leased assets, to be more wary of having those fixed outgoings and that ability to absorb times in the market, such as now. So I think, yes, going forward, albeit depending how the profit share works, it doesn't necessarily stack up. It needs to be equitable for both parties.
That's fine. That's great. Thank you. One of the questions
I think
that
in the US, on the franchise stuff in the US, it's already started and it's prevalent. So check out VentureX, Innovation Depot. It's happening now. So, okay. And VentureX just here in the UK.
Oh, great. One of the other questions that the audience have asked is, will the cost of flex office space adjust to reflect that users may only want to use the office a couple of days a week, while also ensuring hygiene standards allowed for those shared spaces?
You know, there's an element of the kind of the COVID kind of social distancing kind of element, which, you know, is common across any kind of office space that we have today. So if you don't want to go into a kind of serviced office, then you need to kind of take, you know, a lease kind of somewhere else. Or if you need some physical space, I think that is common across the entire market. And, you know, that point alone, I don't necessarily see kind of, you know, driving pricing. Now, there are other kind of impacts on pricing, because if, you know, there's a lot more kind of secondary space coming to the market, you know, there's kind of, you know, people going bust, whatever happens, there's kind of other supply demand shocks that could impact pricing. But on the kind of social distancing, I don't think tomorrow that the co-working operators are going to sort of necessarily, to respond to that point, kind of drop all desk prices. However, there is an element, if you kind of have a building that you want to fill it, right, being more dynamic on pricing and kind of being more competitive, I think that bit will happen. On the working from home point, you know, I think it's tricky, because to me it becomes a bit of a sort of a structuring and leasing kind of challenge, you know, sales, and how do you kind of do a deal which that kind of works? Because, you know, I guess the sort of the hyper flexible co-working model there's something in there. If you want to take a membership for 2 days a week, that will work. On the private office side of it, becomes a bit more challenging, because, you know, if you want a space that's, you know, however big and it's yours and it's fitted out your way, then I think it is, you know, without some really, really innovative kind of leasing, licensing arrangement on it, it becomes challenging. And look, and just taking a step, you know, looking at it from the other side, so that's the sort of the customer facing side of it. As a kind of a user of it, that's kind of how I can see it. But from a business point of view as well, you know, if you all of a sudden, because the desks, you need to have kind of social distancing, and you can only fit half the number of people in there. If you suddenly maintain the same, if you try and kind of half your desk rate or maintain it based on the half of the occupancy, you know, an operator just won't survive. You just can't do it. You know. So you can kind of get through a difficult period, you've got deeper pockets than the next person, and you can kind of keep your buildings full, and yes, that's fine, but long term, it's just not sustainable doing that, unless there's an entire structural change in the rents of, you know, across the world, which is probably unlikely.
So I want to try and squeeze in this one last question from Maria Frank of Maria Frank Planning. Do the panelists think the service office sector can revitalise our alien town centres? And if so, how and to what extent?
So we're in conversations with a number of councils and universities about how we can collaborate to do something similar. So I won't comment on sort of the real estate sort of plays and how their role within that, but I think there's a it's not the responsibility of one organisation, but that of a collective and many to work together to create the right environment that is conducive to supporting early stage businesses being able to grow, but also helping local incumbent organisations, whether it's the universities, whether it's the councils, whether it's the larger organisations, also participate within that.
That is all we have time for. I would like to thank the panelists for their time. I'd like to thank the audience for sticking around with us, and I'd like to thank the BPF Futures and YPREF also for putting this on. So this recording will be available after if you want to watch it after. But thank you very much, and that is everything.